Welcome back to the Armchair Illini podcast. This half of the hour, we are joined by Jordan Malley from Locked On Bulls. Jordan, how you doing, man?
Hey guys, how are you?
Oh man, we're just out here living the dream. Alex, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Great news of Illini sports this morning, but all good.
Yeah. So at the time of recording, this is Friday morning, and there was some not good news in Illinois sports, but we're going to ignore that for this segment. And we're just going to talk Bulls basketball as the NBA draft is officially less than 1 week away. Can't believe it. And the Bulls have the 7th pick in the draft. Jordan, if you had to put some money on it right now, who are the Bulls picking at 7?
Yeah, this has been something I've been going back and forth with in the last couple of weeks. If you would have asked me probably 2 weeks ago, I would have said Mikal Bridges is your guy there. I think it makes sense with the timeline and the history of what the Bulls have taken and what they normally like to take in the first round. But now I'm getting this sort of growing suspicion that if Trae Young's available at number 7, that they might take him there as well. I'm getting the growing belief that Michael Porter Jr. isn't going to be available at number 7, and the only way the Bulls really want him is to move up into the top 5. So if I had to place my bets on it right now, it's probably 50-50. I would maybe hedge my bet on Trae Young with Mikal Bridges as well. So I'm looking at those two guys. I personally like Wendell Carter Jr. I don't know if he's going to be there as well. It depends on what Orlando sees, because in our Locked On mock draft, he went at 6. And Bagley slid all the way down to 7. So some interesting stuff can happen, and I think it's tough to put my finger on one guy that I think the Bulls are going to take, because there's probably about a handful that people are really split on in Bulls Nation.
Yeah, so if the Bulls do take Trae Young, there's been a lot of talk about Chris Dunn's situation. Last year we made that trade for him, and there's a lot of talk that he would be the point guard of the future. Do you think they would coexist, or do you think the Bulls would move on from Chris Dunn?
My biggest problem with taking Trae Young and whether or not Chris Dunn is out is, okay, if they don't really trust Chris Dunn and they don't feel like he's going to be the point guard of the future, which would go against a lot of what they had said over the last 12 months, especially when they made the Jimmy Butler trade. I think that's kind of interesting. One little note that I made over the last couple of days, just listening to a couple people that are around the Bulls, Bill Wennington being one of them, who played with John Paxson, talked about this philosophy and this idea of players sticking around Chicago and working out here. Obviously, that's kind of different now in the modern NBA. Guys go all over the place and have personal trainers and are able to work out through the offseason. But I think that's a sticking point, and they were aggravated with Nikola Mirotic when he was here a couple of years ago, and he decided to go play in Europe rather than stay home and work out in Chicago. So I don't know if that has something to do with their disdain for Chris Dunn so far this offseason, but it leads me to believe that this is probably a stretch in my imagination. Chris Dunn doesn't seem like the guy that would be lazy or lackadaisical with his workout, especially when he still has something to prove, not playing a full healthy season last year. So if the Bulls do take Trae Young, I would imagine that the Bulls would probably make some calls and see who might be interested. If they can get back into this lottery by trading Chris Dunn and they really believe high in Trae Young, then maybe they do that, or they just take Trae Young at number 7 and they throw him, Zach LaVine, and Chris Dunn out there in some type of weird first and second rotation and figure out who might be the odd man out. But can you guys imagine watching Trae Young and Zach LaVine try to play defense all year next year?
That was exactly my thought. Just watching some of the highlights from Trae's workout yesterday. It's like, if him and LaVine are in that backcourt together, opposing offenses are just going to be able to get to the bucket at will, do whatever they want. You'd have to have Chris Dunn out there for any chance of getting stops, honestly. Because Markkanen, while I was more impressed with him defensively than I thought I would be, he's still not a plus defender in my opinion. So you have probably 3 of the 5 guys you throw out there can't play defense. Yeah, that's pretty much a recipe for disaster. And with the Chris Dunn report, for me, watching all of last year, it just felt against his character. Like that report seemed out of character for me. And I don't really see how he would change that this offseason. And I think a lot of the people in the NBA community are overblowing the report. The Bulls said less than impressed, and it feels like a lot of the reporters are saying, the Bulls hate Chris Dunn now. So it's definitely interesting for sure. If the Bulls take Trae Young, I'd like to see them try to coexist. And also, Zach LaVine's another factor here. Jordan, what kind of money do you think Zach LaVine's going to get from the Bulls this summer?
Well, considering I don't think there's going to be a lot of teams in play in restricted free agency for him, I know I've even pushed the envelope and said there might be one or two teams that might make a call for Zach LaVine, but I think I'm safe to say that he's not going to get a max contract this summer unless something outrageous happens, like Atlanta wants to go all in on him. Even in that token, I think the Bulls are going to match whatever offer he gets out there in free agency. I'd like to see him get something like a short-term deal, a 2 or 3 year deal where the Bulls can pay him a little bit more money, but still have the flexibility to say, all right, if this doesn't work out, then you can let him walk in 2 or 3 years. I don't know what Zach LaVine's agents and what they're thinking on their side. I don't know if they want to try to do a prove-it deal to see if he can get a max deal after 2 years of going out there and playing healthy and maybe proving to a lot of Bulls fans that he's not a terrible defender and he actually can be a consistent scorer on this team. So if I had to put my bets on it, probably somewhere between 18 and 22 million per year. I'd like to see that over 2 or 3 year stretch instead of 4 or 5 years where you're locked into him. And if he ends up getting hurt again, or he doesn't turn out to be the player that we thought he was on the Timberwolves, then the Bulls will have a little bit of flexibility if they can only give him a little bit of a shorter term deal, and they can afford it too. They still are $25 million in cap space free this summer, so they can definitely afford it. And if it's on a short term deal, I'd like that. I think that'd be more advantageous for a rebuilding Bulls team than to commit 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. Your other pick other than Trae Young was Mikal Bridges, the small forward out of Villanova. There's been a lot of talk about him and his 3-and-D potential. Do you think that 3-and-D potential is something that the Bulls really need?
I think it's the number one thing on the list of needs for the Bulls this summer and going into next season. I think if they don't take Mikal Bridges at number 7, I think they're going to definitely look at that at number 22 and see if that's an option, or try to trade up somewhere in the middle teens to take somebody that can fulfill that wing position. I know Chandler Hutchison has been a name that's been thrown out there at number 22. Even if they try to move back with that number 7 pick, which could be a possibility as well to gain 2 picks in the late lottery, that might be a need that they would look at with Mikal Bridges if he slides to 10 or 11 on where he's sitting right now on draft boards. It's where he's going. So if they like Kevin Knox as well, I think 9 through 11 might be a spot, or 9 through 12 might be a spot where you could snag potentially 2 of those guys. So I think if they don't address it right now in the draft, which I'm almost 100% certain they will at either number 7 or number 22, I'm sure they'll go out and take a look in free agency and try to sign somebody else or try to make a trade for a guy that they can plug and play right away.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, the Bulls are in a situation and take on a contract that a team doesn't want. So I've definitely heard Kenneth Faried thrown around. So if the Bulls want to move into the draft that way, they can. But the Bulls have options, and at 7 and 22, and possibly in the middle of the draft as well. Jordan, who are some of your rising prospects, and who's falling off the draft boards right now?
I think in the Bulls instance, I think it's a little bit of a reach to take Kevin Knox at number 7. I know the Ringer had published that. They talked about Trae Young going at 9, I think, to the New York Knicks, and then Michael Porter Jr. going at 4 to the Grizzlies. I think he's probably one that's been a bit of a surprise for a lot of analysts who've watched him during workouts. It was interesting that the Bulls brought him in, and I think guys that are going between 7 and 15, the Bulls have worked out a ton of those guys. You look at Miles Bridges from Michigan State, Robert Williams from Texas A&M. Some of these guys are going towards the back half of the lottery, so that has me at least staying a little bit curious, because the Bulls are not leaving any options out and off the table. So we'll see, but I think somebody that's rising is Michael Porter Jr. too. I think we're all kind of surprised that the Kings are this infatuated with him, and I think they're a little bit frustrated too. It's weird to say this, but a team that would be most likely not wanting to end up in the top 3 like the Kings did in the lottery this year. You look at that team, and if they want to take Michael Porter Jr., maybe he'll fall to 4, 5, or 6, and they can try and move down. But we've heard of the top 3 teams are, at this point, outside of the Suns, like the Kings might be looking to move down, the Atlanta Hawks might be looking to move down, and the Grizzlies might be looking to move down. So I think the 1 through 7, 1 through 8 picks All it takes is one player really to mess this entire draft up. If somebody takes Trae Young in the top 5 or takes Michael Porter Jr. in the top 5, we might see some shifting going on in the top 10.
Definitely. Do you think the Bulls would consider moving up? I've heard reports that if they do move up, they would have to move like a Bobby Portis or even like one of their main rotation players. Do you think they would look into that to move in? Maybe take a look at Mohamed Bamba or Jaren Jackson, or even have a shot at Marvin Bagley?
I think if the Bulls want to move up, that means they'll probably call the Grizzlies and see what they want for Parsons. I know the first report for Parsons was that the Grizzlies wanted a high-level contributor right away. So I know there was a connection with Kevin Love. If LeBron James leaves and Cleveland wants to make that deal for Kevin Love, they end up with 4 and 8 then in the draft. You look at a couple other teams, and I ask myself, really, like, what can the Bulls offer some of these teams ahead of them in order to make it advantageous for both sides? And the Bulls don't have a whole lot to offer. You mentioned Bobby Portis, and you mentioned maybe Denzel Valentine as well, but I don't think the Bulls are willing to just give up on Bobby Portis because of the sort of breakout season that he had this year. He's going to be a 4-year player now coming into this season. And I think he's still got a lot of development left to do, but I think he's been the quiet surprise in the Bulls season this year. So if they're looking to trade with the Grizzlies, I'm not giving up anything more than maybe my 7th round or my number 7 overall pick to move up to 4 if I have to take on Parsons' contract. And even if you have to throw a sweetener in there, maybe throw in Justin Holiday or somebody like Denzel Valentine to make that deal happen. But if I had to include Portis or the number 22 pick, I'm probably hanging up the phone. So more likely, I think there's a more possibility that the Bulls either stay at 7 or move down rather than move up. And you look at some of the guys that they worked out. I had mentioned Kevin Knox and Miles Bridges and Robert Williams. They brought in Lonnie Walker for a workout. All these guys are looking to be anywhere between 9 and 15 in the draft. So that might be interesting as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's another prospect too. At number 7, the Bulls have already worked him out. He kind of remained in the shadows throughout the year, but he is, I think it's the safest pick for the Bulls at 7, and that's Wendell Carter Jr., center from Duke. I think a lot of people think he could be a good fit next to Lauri Markkanen in that front court. And Jordan, what's your take on Wendell Carter Jr. and what do you see from his handling of the media and things in this workout?
I really like Wendell Carter Jr., and I didn't like him as much when Duke was playing, and that was because more of the focus was on guys like Marvin Bagley. I think from watching the film on Wendell Carter Jr., he's a guy that's going to be a rim protector. You're going to be able to plug him in right away, and you can see him develop. I know people are giving him the comparison to maybe a diet version of Al Horford when he ends up developing, but playing alongside Lauri Markkanen, I think Wendell Carter Jr. could be a fantastic fit. It might not be like the most glamorous pick in the world for the Bulls, but if they want to go with a big man and like Bamba's off the board, and you're talking about some of these other guys like Marvin Bagley being off the board, Jaren Jackson Jr. being off the board, and they don't feel like Mikal Bridges is really their guy and they want to take a chance on a 19-year-old. I think the kid from Duke is really good. He's going to be able to be inserted in that second rotation behind Robin Lopez. I think he can learn a lot from him. I don't know how long Robin Lopez is still going to be around, probably this season alone. But if he can learn some stuff from him, I think he's a guy that with that second unit could play well alongside Bobby Portis and then eventually again alongside Lauri Markkanen. You want a guy that's going to be able to spread things out for Lauri Markkanen and be able to open up that 3-point shot. I think giving him the ability to spread the floor and having a guy that is also an offensive weapon underneath the basket is going to be something that would be advantageous for the Bulls. So I really like Wendell Carter Jr., and if they take him there, I won't be disappointed at all.
Yeah, Wendell Carter's my pick for this draft. But going towards the 22nd pick, which is the other first-round pick that the Bulls have, do you think the pick that they make there is sort of dependent on what they do at 7? I know you talked a lot about 3 and D. Chandler Hutchinson has been a name that's been thrown around a lot. But if they take a guy like Bridges or even a guy like I'm blanking right now, like a Jaren Jackson, if they get there, do you think that they'll take Chandler Hutchinson as well at 22?
Yeah, so we heard that Chandler Hutchinson, he canceled all of his workouts, the rest of his workouts at the NBA Combine, and there was a rumor floating around that he had a guarantee between 17 and 22 from a team. There was growing knowledge that it might have been the Indiana Pacers, that it was even the Chicago Bulls. There's a bunch of connections that you can kind of connect the dots with in order to make sense of this. And he's represented by Mark Bartelstein of Priority Sports. That's here in Chicago. Him and Jerry Reinsdorf are longtime friends, and he represents a lot of other guys, Sean Kilpatrick on the Bulls. He represents Bobby Portis and a handful of other guys in the past. So there's a working relationship there. I think the need makes sense too, especially if you go with a big man at number 7. It seems to fit the bill for a guy that's a 4-year player, played really well in his senior season at Boise State. So I went back and looked at the film at him. He's a guy that's not afraid to take the big time shot. I think his ability to score off the dribble is really great, and same thing with driving to the basket. And he's a guy that you're going to be able to plug in that second unit and pretty much play right away. And I think you're going to be able to offset some of that responsibility on the defensive end on a guy like that, as opposed to maybe taking a guard at number 22. I know that the name Dante DiVincenzo from Villanova has been thrown out there as well, or even Kevin Herter from Maryland. So either of those guys, I think it really is going to depend what they take at number 7, though. And I wouldn't even put it out of the possibility if they take Mikal Bridges or Michael Porter Jr. or even Kevin Knox at number 7, that they might still go with Chandler Hutchison at number 2 and kind of beef up their 3-and-D wing with 2 additions in this draft. But I wouldn't even put it out of the possibility that they move up from number 22 if they really like somebody at the back end of that lottery, if they can't find a way to add an additional first-round pick without giving up number 22.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, too, I think there's a possibility if the Bulls take a Wendell Carter Jr. at 7, or if a big falls to them that they really like, that they could go the point guard route and take a guy like Landry Shamet. Are there any other prospects at number 22 that you would like to see the Bulls take?
I mean, in our lockdown mock draft, Colin Sexton fell all the way to 18. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen. I know a lot of other guys in our network aren't as high on Colin Sexton. I think that maybe some other people are. We talked about the point guard position too, which is kind of up in arms. It's the same sense. I would, if he falls all the way down, I think he'd be a nice pick too. The kid from Georgia Tech, Joshua Okogie, he's been getting a lot of rumors about maybe ending up between 16 and 19. I remember when he played on the team in the NIT against Indiana a couple years ago, and he absolutely torched the Hoosiers. So I can still remember him, and he is very good, very versatile. Ricky O'Donnell of the SB Nation, he made a really nice comparison of saying that he might be an upgraded David Nwaba if you look at him. So he might be an option too as well at 22. Whatever the Bulls do at number 22, I think there's probably 5, 6, 7 guys that'll be available there that would make sense. Keita Bates-Diop being another one from Ohio State too, which I really liked, and I think he was a large in part the reason why Ohio State was so good last year.
Yeah, definitely. Keita Bates destroyed Illinois last year, so they could definitely see him succeeding on the Bulls. So with the draft happening, is there anything else that would go on this offseason, in terms of free agent signings? The Bulls have the chance to be active with their cap room, and they've got a really attractive young nucleus to sell with Lauri Markkanen, Chris Dunn and Zach LaVine if they do stay, and the draft picks that will be coming in. So do you think there'll be any big free agent moves that the Bulls could try to get into?
Honestly, guys, I think I would rather see the Bulls use their cap space to try to get back in for a 3rd pick in this draft, somewhere in the late lottery or the early teens, like we had talked about in Denver. They're looking to offload Kenneth Farid's contract, and Atlanta's been really active in talking about adding another pick, and that would give Atlanta 3 picks in this draft as well. So I think the Bulls need to explore these options, and if they don't like anybody in free agency, or they don't want to spend a whole lot of money in free agency, you try to use your cap flexibility to go after a team that might want to offload their contracts. I think about the Los Angeles Lakers and Luol Deng, and that contract is terrible too. But if you can find a way to get some first-round picks out of that, maybe the number 25th pick, and then you ask for a future first-rounder with low protections next season, you could offset that and gain a couple more assets, one being in this draft again, and then one being next year. I think the Bulls, another thing to keep in mind when they're going into free agency, not that I think they're going to spend a lot of money outside of Zach LaVine, but John Paxson and Gar Forman have said since they started this rebuild, and more so throughout this season, that they're not planning on being in the lottery for very long. They don't want to be at the bottom half of the NBA for very long. So that hints at to me that they're either going to not spend a lot of money this year, keep flexibility open, and go all out next season. But I don't know. I just don't see any real fit. We've talked about guys like Jabari Parker and Nerlens Noel and some of these other free agents out there that you could take flyers on. But it really just doesn't make any sense for what the Bulls are trying to do here. And you don't want to give up a whole ton of money. So if I'm thinking about teams or free agents, I mean, I would look at the Bulls' own roster instead, like Noah Vonleh being a piece that has a $4.7 million qualifying offer. Maybe if you can sign him to a multi-year deal at somewhere between $4 and $6 million a year, he'd be a nice piece, I think, that you could develop in this small ball offensive style game that they're trying to go towards. You look at David Nwaba too. I think he's going to be a very important guy for the Bulls to try and keep around. Now, if things get crazy and some competitive teams start offering him a multi-year deal at $8 to $12 million, I think the Bulls are going to pass on that. One last guy I think too that they've got, and probably the biggest decision they need to make, is on Zach LaVine. I don't see him walking away. It's just going to be a matter of how much money they're going to give him and how many years. Like I said before, 2 to 3 years on Zach LaVine, I think that would be the most optimal. So if I'd answer your question in full, I'd rather see the Bulls use their cap flexibility to try to get back into this draft or gain future draft picks in order to sort of leverage teams once they feel like they're ready to take the next step to really be competitive in the playoffs.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think one thing that I'm really proud of with this Bulls organization is the fact that they did not spend big when the cap rose a bunch a few years ago, when a bunch of other teams were throwing deals around like crazy, and Timothy Mozgov and Luol Deng went to the Lakers for big contracts, and the Bulls pretty much stood pat. You know, they didn't sign any bad long-term deals, and now they're the ones with the flexibility to go into this draft, maybe add another pick or maybe add a nice piece in free agency. So I commend them for that. As much as we like to hate on the front office, I think they did a pretty good job managing the cap situation a few years ago, and now they're in a position to be competitive when it comes to adding picks in the draft and signing free agents. So as we kind of wrap up the show, Jordan is an IU grad, so we kind of want to talk a little bit IU basketball with him. Jordan, what are you looking forward to from IU basketball this coming season?
I think it's been something that I've been waiting for since 2013, when Romeo Langford was the first conversations about Romeo Langford were happening. I remember being on campus, and even when Victor Oladipo and Cody Zeller were there and still the teams were up and down, Yogi Ferrell was there. Romeo Langford was somebody that Indiana fans were already looking at for the future. And I think a second year of Archie Miller and having a lot of these guys return, I think one of the biggest things for Indiana this year is going to be having a veteran guy like Juwan Morgan coming back. I felt like his game, and especially being able to be showcased now with a guy like Romeo Langford and some of these other top recruits, Indiana, I think, has 4 top 100 recruits or 5 top 100 recruits coming in this draft class. They've got guys that were redshirted last year, Race Thompson being one of them. So I'm excited. I think this Indiana team is going to be very athletic and be a lot of fun to watch. And this is going to be really the first opportunity that you're going to see these are Archie Miller's guys, as opposed to kind of a spillover of Tom Crean's players. And that was my biggest concern last year, is I think a lot of teams weren't buying into what Archie Miller was trying to do, especially some of the older guys like Robert Johnson. So I think this is going to be really the first opportunity, similar to like kind of what we talk about with Fred Hoiberg being able to finally have his own team and do what he wants. I think the same sentiment goes for Archie Miller, and he's going to have a lot of pressure on him too coming into this season. Like, you have a top 10 recruit coming in and you kept him inside the state. That's a lot of pressure coming from Indiana fans. So I'm looking for them to have a really great season this year, and they should be extremely competitive in the Big Ten, and they should use this opportunity for Romeo Langford to make sure that they stay in the top 25 and definitely make the tournament this year. So there's definitely high hopes for Indiana basketball this season.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. As Illinois fans, we don't have much to look forward to next year.
Yeah, we're so jealous right now.
We don't have anyone on the roster over like 6'6" at the moment. So we are pretty much going to get destroyed every night.
Yeah, the one guy that is above 6'6", he's a 7-footer. He's not supposed to be on campus anymore until August because he had like a transcript issue. So he just left. So we pretty much have, let me think, like 7 scholarship players right now, and then 3 walk-ons, and they're all pretty much guards. So,
oh man, what do you guys think of Brad Underwood, real quick?
We like him. I think he's great. I love his intensity. He gets the most out of his players, but I also think guys don't really like playing for him sometimes. And we've seen that this offseason with like 40 transfers out of the program pretty much, it feels like. But I love watching him. I love watching him on the sidelines. I've been to a game and you can hear him shouting from like the second deck in the stadium. So his intensity is great. I just think he needs to start getting some players. And Ayu Dosunmu, which he's playing with the USA U18s right now, is a great start. Trent Frazier's good too. So they have a couple pieces, but they could still be pretty terrible next year. But I don't think it's necessarily Brad Underwood's fault.
Yeah, definitely. Underwood's an old school coach. Like Zach said, you can hear him screaming from just the top of the stadium, and he'll be the first guy to admit that not everyone can play for him. So he's one of those coaches that's really old school, like a Bob Huggins, Frank Martin. Definitely not like a player's coach. He's really nice off the court, actually. I met him once, and he's just really nice. But he really gets after it for his players. Me and Zach were actually watching highlights of him screaming at people before you came on.
So it sounds like a Tom Thibodeau sort of style where not every guy can play for him.
It's very Tom Thibodeau, yeah.
Yeah, he will be like spitting and like sweating in the huddle. It's like, man, that's fun.
And he'll totally play all of his players 40 minutes too.
Oh, that's great. It sounds like shades of early 2010s when Tom Thibodeau was here and you just see him get red-faced every time. I thought he was interesting too. I like him. I thought that was an interesting signing. I at least I was seeing it from afar, but I didn't totally hate John Gross. I just didn't think he recruited that well. And maybe that wasn't partially his fault. And I don't know what you guys thought about John Gross, but they talked about him being maybe an assistant with Archie Miller when Archie Miller came on. I thought that would have been a bad idea. Do you guys hate John Gross?
Yeah, he's not the most well-liked guy. He definitely like underachieved, but he was a super nice, one of the nicest coaches like you'll ever meet. Just not a good basketball mind. Made a lot of really questionable like X's and O's mistakes. And definitely, I think recruitment, he did okay. At Illinois and IU too, you're definitely held to a high level with some of the past coaches that we've had. But I think he did what he could, but it just wasn't good. So
yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't hate John Gross. It's just he wasn't a great coach. That's all.
Yeah, the only thing he has is that win over number 1 Indiana. In 2012 or whatever it was. Like we still hold on to that like religiously. Like that's
we had to bring that up.
It's like our one shining moment. That's all we have from the past 6 years. So
you're referring to the game where they decided not to cover on the layup with
exactly
like,
yes
2 seconds left in the inbound. Oh,
when Cody Zeller forgot who he was guarding for like 5 seconds. Yeah, it was awesome.
That game still kills me.
Yeah,
that was a great game though.
It was awesome. I still watch it. Like replays of it.
Relive some relevant Illinois basketball.
Yeah. Well, Jordan, man, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We loved having you. You bring a lot of good insight to us. Jordan, where can the people find you on Twitter?
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on. You guys can listen to Matt Peck and I both do Locked On Bulls over at the Locked On Podcast Network. We produce 5 shows a day. So if you want to subscribe to us, we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Android Market, Google Play, Spotify, literally anywhere you find podcasts, you'll be able to find us. You can follow me on Twitter at Jordan C. Malley and follow all of our written content over at lockedonbulls.com. Thanks again for having me on, guys. This was awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. We actually listened to the show a good amount. It's really awesome. You guys do a great job. So.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Alex, where can the people find you, man?
Find me at Alex_KYI or just find us at the Armchair Illini Twitter account. Be sure if you're listening to this to rate us on iTunes and subscribe. That would be great. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, and you can find me at Zach Leslie Hoops on Twitter. I talk about the Bulls, Illinois, movies, all that good stuff. And again, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Armchair Illini. Subscribe, rate, all that good stuff. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode.